Welcome back to this month's episode of The Skin Check. The Skin Check with Jenn is a monthly segment hosted by me, Jenn Schultz, as an opportunity for L.U.V ambassadors and other skin cancer advocates to have a platform to share their story, offer advice, and show support for others. So I'm really excited to introduce you to Dee Conway, another early ambassador for L.U.V, Low Ultraviolet. So Dee is a wife, a mom, a sister, an advocate, and yes, she's another friend of mine. We have really built a bit of a family here in the Low Ultraviolet community. And actually last April, I got to meet Dee in person the same day that I actually met Katie, who was our guest last month. Dee has her own journey with skin cancer, but also in 2018, she lost her sister Rose from melanoma, and she almost lost her husband to valley fever that same year. So it was these two events that led to her advocating and educating people on skin cancer and valley fever, and really advocating for prevention, awareness, and funding. So Dee, I'm super excited to talk to you, get to tell everyone here in the community and on the podcast a little bit more about our advocacy efforts and especially our recent trip to Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Jenn. I'm very excited to be doing this with you.
Yeah, so I gave a little bit of background, but if you wouldn't mind sharing in your own words a little bit about your journey, your story, and then also I'd like to have you share a little bit about Rose as well, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was diagnosed with squamous cell carcinoma in 2019. It was in an area that's very private on a woman's body. I did do tanning beds in my early 20s for about a year. And though I can't say it's definite, but I do believe tanning beds was a reason why I received it, and especially where I received it, because I did not have any UV exposure in that area other than in tanning beds. So with that, I had to do a month of chemo cream. I can't remember the name of it, but chemo cream is just easier to say. And as you can imagine, that's very uncomfortable in that area. They couldn't do a Mohs procedure or anything like that. They could have, but they didn't want to because of the high friction. There's a higher risk for infection. So my dermatologist went with the chemo cream. So I did that for a month. And
just the overall discomfort level in that area of having to heal from a surgery, especially like Mohs.
Yeah. So I did that, and it was caught early. It was a spot that I had noticed. So it was on the surface. And so, it was a spot I noticed, which is why it's important we do our own monthly self-skin check exams. You'll be a lot better at noticing something new versus when you go to your dermatologist annually. They're not going to notice anything, everything that's new. So it's good because I was able to show them new spots, and this one happened to be squamous cell carcinoma, and it was caught early.
Yeah, and that's a really good thing to point out, because I know all of us in the skin cancer community really advocate for skin checks and going to a dermatologist and making sure that you have those appointments, and they're going to be the expert on, I have the spot, it looks funny, is it dangerous, is it not? But we know our own bodies and our skin, so it's really important for us to not only be aware of it and the changes, but also really advocate for ourselves too if it comes to like, no, I really don't think this looks good, or it's changing, or it's different, or anything like that.
Right, yeah. And a dermatologist isn't going to know that something's itching. Is it itchy? They're not going to know that. So it's really knowing your body, your skin, and any changes you've noticed. Along with my squamous cell carcinoma diagnosis, I had also had been diagnosed with atypical melanocystic proliferations, two of them on my face, one here and then one over here. Those, I had to do slow-mos for those. And those, I'm not a dermatologist, so I don't want to go too deep into that. But my dermatologist did decide to send those two biopsies out to another lab outside of their own lab to do a further analysis to make sure there was no melanoma in those cells. But those ones were rough. I had pretty big incision on my face. This one especially. This one, because it was to the side, it didn't bother me as much. But, it was still painful. Still, I had a big pressure bandage on my face here. But this one was square in the middle of my face. The bandaging came up to just under my eye, which is very sensitive. Not comfortable to change out. But I will say my dermatologist did an excellent job at doing the procedure, contouring it to my face. So when you look at my face today, it's barely even noticeable. He did a really, really good job. And so it healed it really well.
Yeah, anyone watching this would not be able to see it, but I've never noticed it either. And we've seen each other in person a few times.
Yeah. It was like this big incision. So yeah, it's pretty incredible what he was able to do.
Well, and on top of that too, anytime you move your face, like laughing, sneezing, eating, coughing, blinking, it's all like that area, no matter what type of facial movement you make, it's going to be affected.
Yeah, and he was more concerned with the movement and just everything around, like my eyebrow over here. This spot was harder for him. Not harder, but he really, really thought about how he was going to do it. And so this one was kind of like a lightning strike, And I told him, are you sure you can't do a unicorn? I'd rather have a unicorn scar. But he said no. But
Is
yeah,
it partly just because we don't have as much skin there, so there's not as much to pull from, or?
I'm not completely sure. He just was worried about it affecting the eyebrow and just everything going on here. So it could be because there is less to work with in that area.
Yeah, I know that happened with a few of my incisions just because of where they were. There wasn't a lot of extra skin. So they really had to think about how they wanted to cut and the direction and be able to take as little as possible and all of that type of stuff. So the things that people that haven't been through it never really think about.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you can imagine, especially this one right on the front of my face, how, just it even once all the bandages were off, how long it took to heal. I was doing my best to keep like Vaseline or whatever to really allow it to, slowly heal, do its thing so that it healed nice. And so, it was a long process for healing. So along with the squamous cell and the atypical melanocystic proliferations, I've had multiple, I would have to count it up, but dysplastic nevus from mild to severe. And those are the ones that we're typically finding nowadays on me. My first one that was removed off of me on my back was when I was 29, and it was a severe one. And I remember my dermatologist at that time talking to me, telling me, Dee, that was really close to cancer. And I think what I've kind of thought about now is, but I still didn't take sun protection seriously. It still didn't resonate with me. I still didn't have that awareness or education that I needed to protect my skin. So, so those are what we're finding. We're finding them at earlier and earlier stages. And that's due to, it's my monthly self skin checks that I'm finding things. I mean, I had one on my breast that had popped up, a new mole spot. And I showed my dermatologist, we biopsied it, and sure enough, it was a mild dysplastic nevus. And so it can be, they can pop up anywhere. And I have had biopsies from everywhere. So,
yeah, very similar. I mean, most of mine have really been between like my chin and my hips. I haven't really had much like arms, legs. I've had a few spots frozen off my face, but I also have a lot of new moles pop up, and when we're taking them off, they're always coming back as dysplastic or atypical. So obviously, you and I have talked, I've had a few recurrences, but luckily we're still catching most of them very early and in the precancerous, where they're still atypical for the most part and not actually cancerous again.
Yeah, and I've had people reach out to me and ask me why are they, because if it does come back as moderate to severe, especially, I do go in and get an additional excision done. And I've had people ask me why is your dermatologist doing that? And I think it's seen as being aggressive, but because of my risk of getting melanoma, we are aggressive, and it is something that my dermatologist and I have discussed, and I agree with it. That's what I want because I know my risk factors. So that's that's something I think is important is, sometimes people are told, well, watch and wait, but, I personally don't want to watch and wait. And so we go ahead and do an incision to get more out, get clear margins.
I would feel the same way as you. My dermatologist and I sort of have a motto: when in doubt, cut it out.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather just know. And then, so you mentioned high risk, and I think really in the skin cancer community, people know what those risks are or what would be classified a risk. There's even a reel going around right now, again, talking about some of the more common risks like fair skin, sunburns, things like that. But can you share a little bit?
I'm loving those reels. Those are great.
I know, yes. Get the education out there. We need as much of it as possible. And they're fun to watch and see everyone kind of make it their own too. But would you mind sharing a little bit more about what specifically makes you high risk?
So I would say the easy ones to point out, though I do dye my hair nowadays. I was born as a towhead, so I've always had blonde hair. I have blue eyes, and I do have light colored skin. So, yes, I do burn easily. Also, I have had 2 siblings with melanoma. So that is another, for me, that's probably the biggest risk factor, is knowing that I've had 2 siblings with melanoma. I'm trying to think if there's any other. I don't take any medication.
Which you mentioned.
No, that one too. That one's a major one. The fact that I did tanning beds, yes, that, with all the UV rays I can't even, it just makes me sick thinking that I did that and thinking about it. And, I wish we could get rid of those.
I know. Someone needs to invent a time machine so we could go back and undo all of the damage that we did to our skin in the past. So yes, if we had a time machine, we would definitely go back and erase a lot of the sun and skin damage that we did to ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And so we just went to Washington, D.C. last month for the Melanoma Research Foundation's Advocacy Days. And you were actually the one who first introduced me to Advocacy Days. And so I want to ask how you got started advocating for melanoma funding and awareness and education through that space, and then what got you more interested in becoming an advocate as a whole.
So with Melanoma Research Foundation's Advocacy Days, so I do follow them on Instagram. I also get their emails that they send out. And so I don't know if it was Instagram or their emails where I found out about Advocacy Days. And at the time, it was during the pandemic. And so it was via Zoom. And I thought, wow, that's easy to do. You know, you could do it through Zoom. Now, was I nervous to do it? Yes. I'm not a public speaker, but it is easy to talk through a computer, right? So it's a lot easier. It's a smaller audience. And to be honest, I wasn't sure what to expect, but I feel like Advocacy Days is taking your advocacy work to really the greatest level you could take it to. This is where we're going to get that funding that's needed for research, education, just all this amazing stuff to get us forward in really helping to, as Melanoma Research Foundation says, to eradicate melanoma, which would be a beautiful day.
Mm-hmm.
So I started doing that. I was surprised because I was the only Arizona advocate. And I was scared because then I was the only person in the meetings with the senators and the congresswoman for my district. And I spoke up and told Melanoma Research Foundation, one of the representatives there through that group, could I have a buddy, you know? And so, if anybody does decide to do this at the Advocacy Days and you show up and you're the only person for your state, you can always ask for a buddy and they'll make it happen. And it made it much, much easier, especially for my first time, because I wasn't really sure how it was going to go. Like, how do you conduct these meetings? They prep you and everything, but once you get there, it's like, how does this really work?
Mm-hmm.
And so my buddy really kind of led the meeting. And then I was able to tell my story. And so that was the first year I did it. And then the second year was again through Zoom. And that's when you joined in for Advocacy Days for your state. Thank you very much. I'm so happy you did that. And then we had Candace also for Arizona. So that helps. So there was two of us now for the state. And so, I think getting multiple people for a state is really, really cool. You really, help each other through those meetings and you feel like you have that support. What else did you ask me?
What made you want to get involved in advocating in that way?
I know this will obviously be, the video will be, is this where you want me to talk about my story, my family story? Is that?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So I became very passionate about advocacy. In 2018, I lost my sister Rose to melanoma. And her situation to me really needed, sorry, hold on one second. So for her, for what happened to Rose, it happened really quickly. She passed away 6 months after her initial diagnosis, which was really, really quick. She was diagnosed with stage 3B, and she had started immunotherapy and had a rare, very, very rare reaction, called hyperprogressive disease. And it's a pretty devastating diagnosis. Essentially, the immunotherapy didn't work, and the cancer was widespread. One thing I do want to say about this is there's still a lot of research for hyperprogressive disease and why it happens. It's still unknown. Is this due to the immunotherapy? Is this something to do with the person's body? What is causing that? And that is a very rare side effect that can happen to anybody that goes on to immunotherapy for any cancer where they use that. So, Rose and I were very, very close. Very, very close. And it was shocking, that this little mole on the back of her lower neck could be so deadly and so quickly. And so for me, it made me want to learn more. It made me want to make people aware of it, and that, skin cancer can't just be cut out all the time. It can spread to your organs. And so many people I've connected with, it's absolutely, it's just crazy what it can do. And so making people aware of that is very, very important to me. And I think it's part of helping to bring the numbers down of the occurrences of melanoma, especially. 3 months after my sister passed away, one of my brothers was diagnosed with melanoma, and he definitely credits Rose for saving his life, because he hadn't had a skin check. I think he had told me he'd had one before, maybe in his early 20s, and now he was in his, I believe, mid 40s, and found the melanoma on his chest. Luckily, it was in situ. As much as I hate to say luckily, but if you get diagnosed with melanoma, that's the stage you want to find it at. Mm-hmm. But, so he went, that was, I remember the phone call. Him and his wife called me, and it was hard for them to even tell me to get it out. But when they told me, the line just went silent, and it felt like forever. But I mean, it was probably a few seconds. It really, it was hard to hear about that diagnosis for him after we had not too long ago lost our sister to it. So that's really what pushes me. My family hadn't had a history of melanoma, and now I have 2 siblings with melanoma. And for me, being involved with advocacy days, I'm hoping we get more, just more knowledge of why all of a sudden my generation, my siblings, why are we having all these skin problems? Why is this happening all of a sudden to all of us when we didn't have it previously in our other generations? and there's a lot of factors that go into why that might be. And so, I really am passionate, and I feel like Advocacy Days really is going to help us get to where we want to get to eventually. And, we want people surviving from this and keep those survival rates going up.
Yeah, first I want to thank you just for sharing both Rose's story and then also your brother's story, because I know that that's not easy, especially right now. But I mean, those are the stories that really make an impact, just even in these types of situations where one person hears it and maybe they learn something and they go get a skin check. But when we take those stories to a place like Washington, D.C., and we're talking to lawmakers and we're even educating them a little bit on how important this is, that's a really powerful moment. And I know one of the lawmakers that I spoke to said that it's these stories and testimonies that they can take to the floor and really help them push to get our asks
Yeah.
through, because they have tangible evidence that we need this and this is why. And it's not just numbers, it's constituents
Right.
in their districts that it's affecting, that we could be helping and saving. And a lot of the research is helping not just melanoma, even though we're coming at it from a melanoma perspective, but a lot of other diseases
Yeah.
and cancers as well.
Yeah. I was really excited about the telehealth
Mm-hmm.
ask, and then the diversity in clinical trials. I was very excited about those asks because, yeah, that benefits so many people um, to get these opportunities. Those were very exciting for me to hear because, yeah, I live in a rural area. Telehealth became a huge thing for us with my husband's lungs being not the greatest after valley fever. Telehealth became really important for us, and the diversity, the clinical trials, hearing during advocacy days, hearing the presentation on that and the different, possible, people that aren't in these clinical trials because of the lack of diversity. And so that, we're going to get better and better data if we include, are able to diversify those clinical trials. So I found that very, very exciting to have those asks in there. And so it's amazing, because we don't know always what we're going to be talking about until we
Mm-hmm.
get there. Right. And so, um, I do get excited when I see what we're going to be asking about and the clinical, the diversity for clinical trials and telehealth. I found very exciting because it's going to benefit so many people.
Yeah, and just to give a little bit more background for those who maybe don't know, but the telehealth with COVID, there were a lot of exceptions and waivers made so that people had more access to telehealth, and there were more telehealth flexibilities. So you could see doctors via Zoom or like and some type of virtual call. And where a lot of times insurance companies restricted that in some ways. And so essentially what we're trying to do is make those flexibilities permanent, which is huge for people like you said, Dee, who live in rural areas. But then even for me, so I live in Minnesota. I live in St. Paul. So I'm in the capital of Minnesota. But when I would have my treatments and stuff, I would actually go home to Wisconsin to recover, which means that if I couldn't do a telehealth visit, I would either have to drive into my clinic to actually see my
Yeah.
care team, or we'd have to drive over the Wisconsin border into Minnesota and sit and do it in our car. So some of it's kind of ridiculous with the licensing, but yes, there's so many people that would be affected with that one. And then the diversity in clinical trials one is obviously a little bit more obvious. We're looking for more diversity in people in
Yeah.
clinical trials, but they do a really good job of educating us. So we go not knowing what our asks
Right.
are going to be, but you spend an entire day getting information on the things that we're asking for, why we're asking for it, ways to ask for it. And then they try to find people within your group that maybe have a story that connects to try to help give that testimony, make it a little bit more impactful. But they do a really good job of giving us the education and information behind it.
Yeah, they really prep you well. So you go into your meetings with more confidence. And I think too, it gives you time, yeah, to figure out how to connect stories to the asks. And so for my family, when I talk about my story, I always mention that my sister Rose was a microbiologist at Phoenix Children's Hospital. You know, she was doing amazing work there and was really well respected by the doctors. And so the impact of her losing her life to melanoma is a huge impact to the patients at that hospital to have somebody so brilliant working in the lab to get the diagnosis, to find out, all that. But also Phoenix Children's Hospital is a well-known hospital in the country. So, um, you know, when I say that, the representatives for Arizona know exactly what hospital I'm talking
Mm-hmm.
about. And the state's really proud of that hospital. And then also my brother was in the Navy. And if you remember, they were talking about during advocacy days how the military have a higher incident rate of skin cancer, and that the Air Force was number one, Coast Guard was number two, and the Navy was number three. So, thinking about your family's story, how can I connect it to what we're going to be discussing with the representatives is critical, critical to get that connection.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why it's important that we continue to find more people that are willing to come and share their stories.
Yes.
And I know this is something that you and I are both really passionate about. And I actually asked you to bring something today because we had 38 advocates from 17 states. So if you do the math, I I'm an educator, so I do the math. So that's 34% of our states were represented, which isn't even half. And so that's something that you and I have talked about. And Candace,
Yeah.
who is your fellow Arizona advocate, we talked a lot about on the day that we were up on the Hill, but then after, and really wanting to reach out and connect to some of those other states that don't have anyone there, because the more states we can get, the more impact we can make and the more change we can create. So if you want to share the states that we would like to find some advocates for, that
So
would be amazing.
we we would love advocates from the following states to join in advocacy days next year. Um, so I'm gonna read off the list of states that were not represented this year: Alabama, Alaska, Delaware, Hawaii, Idaho, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maine, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, New Mexico, New York, North Carolina, North Dakota, New Hampshire, Oklahoma, Rhode Island, South Dakota, Tennessee, Utah, Vermont, Washington, Wyoming, and I'll let you say the last state, Jen.
My home state of Wisconsin. It's hard to hear all of those.
Yeah, it is, because we know there has to be advocates in all these states. We know there has to be.
Hmm. I mean, I've already been talking to family members, and I think there's that misconception, which you've done a really good job of basically debunking. But I think people feel like, well, if I haven't had skin cancer or I haven't had melanoma, I can't go and share my story. And that's just not true. Anyone who knows
Yeah.
somebody has been impacted, and you still have a story to tell, and that story is just as important.
Right. Right. Yeah. If you know anybody that's had melanoma and you've seen the impact on it, you can talk about that. You don't have to be a person that's had melanoma.
And it was intimidating the first time. It's going to be. And I agree with you, like you said at the beginning, that first year, being able to do it over Zoom, it feels a little bit more, yes, I can do this, a little bit more approachable. But I actually think that the training and education that you get when you're actually there in person is so much better. I just
Yeah, I
remember
agree.
retaining a lot more of the information when we were actually in a
Yeah.
room with people hearing stories. You could ask questions. It was a lot easier to ask questions, get follow up. You're connecting with people in person afterwards to have deeper conversations about it. And then
Right.
even though up front it feels a little bit more intimidating to talk to those lawmakers in person, being there and walking through the halls of the House of Representatives and stuff like that, or just the different,
Yeah.
it's crazy. It's a
Yeah,
really
it
cool
is.
feeling, and you feel like you're really doing something important. And
Yeah.
I really don't have words for how cool it is to be there.
Yeah, it is an undescribable feeling walking the halls of Capitol Hill, walking the grounds, seeing the buildings. I mean, it was my first time at Washington, D.C. I've never been there. And so, you know, all I've ever seen is what I've seen through pictures, and so it was, yeah, it's an undescribable feeling to participate in advocacy days. It's just, you're, and there are mixed emotions. You can be the highest, highest level of excitement and joy and happiness, and just feeling really, really good, um, to, possibly talking about, the impact melanoma has had on your life. And that can be another range of emotions, and knowing that you're going to be talking about that. But after you're done doing all the meetings and speaking with everybody, it is, a wonderful release that you feel at the end. I know Candace and I just embraced each other. So I think that was something that, you didn't get to do after Zoom. It was kind of like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
we're done. But I felt like, because Candace and I were able to hug each other, it really was a great way to end it all.
Mm-hmm. And just even the relationships and connections that you make with the other people that are there, and to be working on such a big mission with
Right.
other people that feel so passionately about the same cause and have some sort of understanding about the experiences that you've been through. They're not the same experiences, but they're relatable, and they understand a lot of the reasons why this is so important. And it just, that shared connection is so meaning, and it's so meaningful. And then just, I don't know. Again, it's really hard to describe, but just being in a room with all those people and meeting them and hearing their stories, you almost don't want to leave. It's really hard to
I
leave,
know.
and it's really hard
It's
to
not long
come
enough.
back to real life
Yeah.
afterwards.
Yeah. Advocacy days is not long enough. That will be my only complaint. Yeah. The connections you make are pretty awesome.
We need like a week-long retreat.
Yeah. We need a week long. We'll make that request.
Yeah. I'm sure they will love it. But hey, just need bigger scholarships then, right? The
Right.
Kimpton George
Right.
would love to have us for an entire week.
Yeah. Right. That would be funny.
But another thing that you mentioned too is you really go through a range of emotions. I know I really didn't expect it. I had 3 meetings throughout the day, and Mine were actually really evenly spaced out. And then in my last one, I went to tell my story and I told it. This was the third time I was telling it that day. And I actually got really emotional and got teary, and I wasn't expecting it at all. I share my story
Yeah.
a lot. I talk about melanoma a lot, but you're just going through so much there. And it wasn't a bad thing, but I wasn't expecting it. And so I think there's that piece of like, how are we also making sure that we're taking care of ourselves while we're doing a lot of this work too? I know you've said before that doing the advocacy work has really helped your mental health, but how do you also protect your mental health while you're doing the advocacy work?
So my husband and I moved out into rural Arizona in 2018. And so because we live in a rural area in the desert, we have access to nature very easily. And for me, getting out into nature, seeing the wildlife, hiking, is really important for my mental health. I feel like I can kind of clear my head, take deep breaths, and just kind of get those endorphins you get when you go out into nature. For me, that's how nature's really, really important to me. So that's how I kind of, yeah,
I think a lot of
that's
people
what I
find
do.
nature really healing. It's very grounding, it's peaceful,
Yeah.
and you just
Well,
have that
and
open space to process.
when we were in Washington, D.C., obviously I was nowhere near nature. But I did find a grassy area that was the sidewalk was tree lined through the middle of this grassy area out just across the street from the Capitol, from Capitol Hill. And there was benches along the sidewalks. And so I would go over there every so often just to kind of have a breather, kind of
Mhm.
clear my head, relax a bit. I hadn't been in a bustling city like that in a while. So, the noises and just everything going on can be a little overwhelming for me as well. So, though I was right there near a street, you just walk down the sidewalk a little bit more and you're amongst the trees, and I watch squirrels. And so it was, you can find a little space that gives you that peace that you need when you need it.
Yeah, I think when we know ourselves and really know what we need, it helps to be able to find similar things when we need them.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
So, with all of your advocacy work, what is the biggest change you would like to see in regards to skin cancer?
I would love to see um, less tan models for UPF clothing and sunscreen ads. I feel that is not advertising the correct way and getting the message across that we really should be, owning our skin tone. Um, and I will tell you, I do. It does trigger me a bit when I see tanned bodies with the sunscreen ads, that it's obvious not their natural skin tone. Um, that's something to me I would love to see. I would love to see gyms not having um, tanning beds in them. I find that is the opposite of the environment they would want, that they're trying to create there. And it boggles my mind when they advertise it as a healthy glow. Um, so that's some changes I would love to see. Um, I really could go on, but
Yeah.
um, so just today, my son had field day, and the kids, they had the younger kids earlier in the morning, and the older kids were from 1 to 3. So I do plan on talking to his school. That I'm like, that's during the middle of the highest UV peak ever. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, why are we doing this? And
Also,
so,
right as things are really ramping up, temperature and heat wise and stuff in Arizona too. I mean, obviously, we know that you can get a sunburn in the dead of winter, even here in Minnesota, but it all of that factors in too. So,
yeah. So it's still just that education that people
mm-hmm.
need. Um, and for me, and I try not to let this stuff get to me, but it does. It'll hit me, but I try to um just kind of acknowledge it and hopefully, kind of push it to the side. Um, but we need more education, and getting advertising changed. Get just it we need a lot we need a lot of change.
Yeah, well, everything that you are doing is certainly going to help start create some of the change. You're doing so much work, I know, on your social media to educate. Obviously, keep advocating. I plan to be there with you in DC next year, along with
Yay.
hopefully many, many of those other states from our list. But I also want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today, sharing your story, your sister's story, your brother's story. For anyone listening, where can they find you if they want to connect and learn more?
I'm on Instagram. I'm cup.o.dee.
And we'll have that in the show notes too. All right. Thank you so much, Dee.
Thank you, Jen. I appreciate it.